Going to look at taking a news article that you might find online and isolating and enlarging part of it just to kind of to really look at one piece of it. So I have an example here, and I took a screenshot of it. It was for the Rosetta mission the other day, and basically what we're going to do for the example is just take this first paragraph and we're going to isolate it inside of Photoshop and put it on a separate layer, and we're going to enlarge it in Premiere using just the basic animation controls in the effects panel. Okay, so the first things first, you need to basically get one of these articles. So to do this, find an article that you really need to use, and then you take a screenshot of it on your computer. So if you're using a Mac, you can use Command-Shift-4 to basically click and drag what you want from the screenshot. Or you can use Command-Shift-3, which will take a screenshot of your entire sort of screen. So either of those will work. So Command-Shift-4 to only get what you want. It'll give you some crosshairs. You can just click and drag. Or Command-Shift-3, which will take your entire screen. Now, if you're on a PC, the way to do it is using the print screen key. And that basically copies the whole screen to the clipboard. Then you can paste it into your own Photoshop document. Okay? So I have this screenshot, which is a PNG on my Mac. And I'm just going to drop it into the assets folder that I've created inside of a folder called Enlarged Article, which is on my desktop right now. So what we're going to do to get started is we're actually going to open this up in Photoshop first, and we're going to do some prelim creative work on it. So I'm going to open it up in Photoshop CS6. So we'll give that a minute here. Here we go. And there won't be any difference as far as CS6 and CC goes to do this. So I'm just using CS6, old habit. Okay, so here is my article, or my PNG inside of Photoshop. If I hit the F key, I can kind of cycle through the different views of this artwork, I'll call it, or article. And we're getting the spinny wheel for a short period of time there. Okay, so if we hit F key again, it comes back to this windowed sort of view. There's the spinning wheel again, and if we hit F again, this is kind of the view that I like to work. It's windowless, so there's no tabs at the top. It's just this one piece of artwork. And if I hold the space bar down, I can switch my cursor to the hand view, which is down here in your toolbar as well. What is it actually called? The hand tool. So if you hold your space bar, whoops, I put a text layer in there by accident. Holding the spacebar, you can move this artwork around. I can zoom in on it using the Z key and holding Alt to zoom out. And then I can still further kind of move the stuff around. Okay, so if we look in our Layers panel, we have Layer 0, which is just one layer, and we haven't done anything to it yet. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to separate out the whole page, which we have here already, and we're going to make a new layer. And on that layer is only going to be this actual section that I want to extract in Premiere and enlarge it and maybe blur out the background, etc. So what I need to do is I'm going to duplicate this, and the easiest way to do that is if you right click on the layer, there is an option to duplicate layer, or what I can do is click and drag down into the new layer icon, which is at the bottom of the layers panel. When I do that, you're going to get layer 0 copy, or whatever the name of your layer was. The first thing that I like to do is rename the layers. So I'm going to name this background, or you could name it original. There we go. And remember, we're just double clicking on the words here. When I do that, I can name this one just article. And there's the spinning wheel again. I don't know what's going on with my computer, but we'll try to bear with it. I'll hit enter here. Okay, so now that I have these two layers, basically I can turn the original off. I'm not really concerned with it anymore. And what I need to do is make sure that I'm clicked onto the article layer, because this is the layer that I want to actually edit. So I'm going to utilize the marquee tool, which is over here, rectangular marquee. There are quite a few different marquees, 4 of them all together, but we're going to use the rectangular marquee tool. And I'm going to select an area of the image that I don't want to have showing up just on this layer. So I don't want the top, and when I hit delete, you'll notice that it actually deletes what I had in my selection. So right now I'm just basically deleting the stuff off of this layer that I don't want. And I only want that article, right? So if I take my rectangular marquee tool, take this area, I don't want this stuff, I don't want the stuff on the bottom. I'm just concerned with that top paragraph, correct? So I'm going to delete that, and one more click and drag. We'll take that, and we're going to delete it. Okay, so if I want to get rid of this selection, I can go up to Select and Deselect, or Command D on your keyboard, and that gets rid of our selection. So now I have my article, and if I turn that on and off using my eyeball, I can see that it's on that layer. And you want to make sure that only that article is on that information. There's nothing else inside of this layer. And if I turn the original back on, you'll notice that nothing changes. It looks the same. If I was to move this article using my Move tool up here, you'll see that they do both exist. Both layers do exist. I just have one layer with the article and the original layer underneath. So I'm just going to undo that move. So we're back to normal. There's my article. And I'm just going to save this as a native Photoshop file. So I'm going to call this article. And I'm going to save it also in my assets folder. So I still have the original screenshot in there. That's good. And we want to make sure layers is checked off. That should be the case by default. We're going to hit save. Okay, so now we're done with this Photoshop file. You just have to make sure that you have 2 layers at least, one article and one original. And the article should just be by itself on its layer. And these little check boxes or squares in the background show transparency. When I turn this original back on, the layer shows back up. So I can close this now. I'm going to save it. And I'm going to start with Premiere now. So Premiere CS6, I could very well just use CC for this as well. I don't think anything should be any different. So I'm going to start a new project, and I'm going to point this project to my enlarged article folder, which is on my desktop. There it is there, and I'm going to hit choose, and I'm going to name this as well. I'll call it article, and I'll hit OK. We'll get this scary new sequence screen. We don't need this. We're going to actually, we do need this. We need to make an actual sequence just for like a placeholder sequence. So I'm going to use the HDV presets, and we're going to do a 720p 30 frame per second sequence for this. So if you look over here, here's the description. So the frame size is 1280 720. The frame rate is 2997. No fields per, and square pixels, and that's what we want. We can name the sequence. We can also name it article as well, and we'll hit OK. Premiere should open up any second here. Fingers crossed. There's that dreaded spinny wheel again. Okay, so here we go. Here is Premiere, and if you hadn't noticed as well, with my Premiere, I've actually lightened the interface up. And if you really want to do that, you just go to Premiere and Preferences, and there's a spot for Appearance. And there's a slider for lighter or darker interface. I think by default, it's, the darkest. But I like to look at stuff a little bit brighter. Okay, so just hit OK. We're going to do the import of that Photoshop file now. So if you want to double-click in the project panel, or go File, Import, or if you have your Finder window open with that article, which I do, you can drag and drop. I'm going to do it this way. And we're going to get this sort of dialog. It's asking you how you want to import this Photoshop file. So this is an important step. You can merge all layers, which we don't want to do. We opened up Photoshop and separated out layers on purpose. So we don't want to merge everything. What we're going to do is explore these options here. We have merge layers, and that way we can actually merge. If we had more than 2 layers, we could pick which ones we want to merge. Individual layers or sequence. If I was to choose sequence, it would basically come over here, and it would be the size that we made it in Photoshop, which we don't want. We have the sequence over here called article because we know we want a 1280 720 sort of sequence. Okay, so I'm going to choose individual layers. It's going to ask me which ones I want. There's only 2 layers in this Photoshop file, so we want both of these. I'm going to hit OK, and it will do its import. And it comes in as a bin or a folder, and inside of that bin will be the 2 Photoshop layers. And you can see there's my article on its own, and there's the whole background or original. Okay, so I'm going to highlight both of those, and I'm just going to drag them down to video 1. So here's the problem. I need basically one layer on top of the other. I need this to look like it does in Photoshop. So the original layer on the bottom, and the article layer on the top. So I'm just going to drag article up to video track 2 and bring the original back over under video 1. So this is basically the same thing as the Photoshop layers. I'm just going to close this bin here so we have some more screen real estate. I'm going to save this project. There we go. So just like Photoshop, we have these little eyeballs that we can turn layers, or in this case, video tracks, on and off. So if I turn my original off, you'll see that there is my article on its own layer, which is video track 2. So now what we need to do is start animating this thing. We're going to click on the article, and then we're going to look up to our Effects Controls panel. And we're going to look at the Motion tab. Remember, these little triangles mean that there's more stuff. There's more options. So we're going to click that. It's called a flyout. And we have position, scale, rotation, anchor point. We also have, if we need it, opacity and time remapping. We'll look at those at a later point. But we're going to be concentrating on scale and probably position for this article. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make or give some room to the effects controls. I'm going to move some stuff around. And I really want to see this timeline over here, so I'm going to push this back a little bit. It's a good habit to kind of get into moving stuff around inside of Premiere, so it gives you a little bit more area to work. So the effects controls. If you take this player head, I don't know what's going on here. There we go. And I move it around. You'll see down in my main timeline, or my program timeline, that it's actually moving with it. And the same thing, if I move this down here, it's moving the effects controls player head as well. So this right here, this article.psd sort of area right here, is the exact same as here. It just gives us an ability to work up here and place keyframes in this area. Okay, so what keyframes are is it's basically saying at a certain point in time be a certain value. So let's take scale for instance. At a certain point in time, let's say this frame right here, I'm just going to move my player head there. If I hit this little stopwatch or toggle animation button, it actually puts a keyframe. So there's one keyframe. It's this little diamond here. And this says, at this point in time, be the scale of 100%. So you need at least 2 keyframes for any animation. So one point and another point later on in time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my player head, move it up in time, and you'll see that the 2 player heads are moving together. And instead of making a new keyframe, I'm just going to change the value. And Premiere will automatically put the keyframe in for me. So instead of 100%, I'm going to scale it up just a little bit. I'm going to scale it up to, let's say, 1, and you can type it in as well, 135. And you can see that my article is now 135%. It's right there. If I turn this original layer off, you can see it a little bit better. Now it's quite a bit bigger than it was originally, right? So if I take my player head and I kind of scroll through in between this keyframe, which is at 100, and this keyframe that is at 135, you can see what's happening when I scrub in between them. The numbers are actually changing. So the values in between these 2 keyframes are kind of put into place by Premiere, so it's basically animating for us. So we just need at least 2 keyframes, one that's at 100, and in my case, one that's at 135. So that takes care of our scaling. If I play this through down here, you'll see that the scaling part is now working. So what we want to do to just kind of make this look a little bit more slick is just combine some elements. So we've keyframed the scale to go up from 100 to 135. We're also going to reposition this as well. So you see how it's kind of off center. We want to make this article almost centered. So I'm going to click on the article layer again, and we can see that that scale frame or scale keyframe is still there. But we're going to make a keyframe for position. Now, at the beginning of the animation, obviously we want the article to be where it is. We don't want to change anything here. But I'm going to take my player head, and near the end of the animation, I'm just going to use this last scale keyframe as sort of the reference point to move it around. Now I'm going to take my X and Y coordinates and just try to center this sort of thing. And you have to do it by eye. That looks good enough to me. So now when I take my player head, you'll see what's happening. It's going from 640 by 360 and to this keyframe, which is 758 by 345. It's getting filled in between those 2 keyframes by Premiere. So it's giving us a scale and position sort of animation right now. So that's looking not too bad. If I hit play, you'll see what happens. Let's basically scaling up. We've got some motion. It's starting to look good already, but I think what we want to do, and the point of this is to kind of isolate that article a lot more. So what we're going to do is we're just going to animate the opacity of the layer underneath, which is our original, and we're just going to bring the opacity down over time so there's a little bit more black. We could also add a blur to it as well. Let's start with the opacity, and then maybe we'll do the blur after. So we're going to select this original article PSD layer, which is on video track 1, and we're going to again use the flyouts to do something with opacity. Instead of the motion transform properties, we're going to use opacity. So right now there already is, the stopwatch is already pressed in, but I just like to undo that and then just click it again, and that gives us that keyframe. So that says at this point in time this article layer is 100% opacity. So I don't want the article to kind of fade out when this article on the top is 100%, or sorry, 135% of the scale. I actually want it to happen a little quicker, right? So let's just move our player head up around this area, and keep in mind that you can move these keyframes around later on. So if the animation is too slow, you can bring the two keyframes closer together, which will make a faster animation, or if it's not quite slow enough, you just space them out further, because remember this is 29.97 frames per second. Okay, so now I'm going to change the opacity at this point in time to, let's see what looks good, somewhere around, let's do 55. Type it in and enter. So now from this keyframe here to this keyframe, it's actually getting more opaque, which makes it look black. So it goes down to 55. So from 100, this keyframe here, to 55, this keyframe. So now we have the animation on the article itself, so it's scaling and repositioning itself, and now we have the background layer kind of fading out a little bit. So let's hit play and see what it looks like. It's looking pretty slick. So the next thing that we might want to do is add an effect to further isolate this article from the background article. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a blur, and the blur will be on the original background. So if we want to add something, we usually come down to the effects controls, and I'm just going to type in the word blur, see what comes up. So here's all the different blurs. We're just going to add a fast blur. That'll render a little bit faster. And we're going to add this effect onto the original article on video track 1. And you'll notice that it gets added into the effects control. So we still have motion, we still have opacity, and we still have time remapping, but now we have another effect called fast blur, which we can also keyframe. If you notice, it still has the toggle animation buttons. So I'm going to use the opacity keyframes as a point of reference, and I'm going to put my blurriness keyframes kind of aligned with these. Okay, so I'm going to set a keyframe at this point in time at 0 blurriness. Now I'm going to come up and move my player head over to where this opacity keyframe is, that's 55%, and I'm going to change the value of this blurriness. And when I do that, it's going to automatically add a new keyframe for me. So I'm going to blur it up to, let's say, 15, just a nice number there. So you see what's happening with the background now. It's actually blurring it out over time. So from 0% blurriness to 15% blurriness. And this is kind of the finished product now. Let's hit play and see how it looks. There we are. So if I wanted to extend these two pieces of footage out, I can. Let's just grab them both here. Sorry, I'm using my trackpad and it's a little cumbersome. I don't have a mouse with me today. There we go. Extend these out. And if I click on either one of these, we can see where the keyframes lie as well. Also, if you expand, you might be able to see, oh actually you can't. I thought you might be able to. But we can always see them up in the effects controls, right? So this is the article keyframes, and if I click on the original, there's the keyframes for opacity and blurriness. So you have to actually click on the piece of footage that you want to see the appropriate effects up in the effects controls. Okay, so let's have one more peek. Zooming up, repositioning, the opacity is coming down on the background and it's blurring. So it looks like a nice finished piece now. So feel free to add this into your stories, and I'm looking forward to seeing this effect. Okay, thank you.